Hello, and welcome to tonight's Commonwealth Club World Affairs program. My name is Kevin Wynn, and I am a writer at the San Francisco Standard, and I'm your moderator for this evening. The club would like to thank the Bernard Osher Foundation for supporting this good lit event. It's my pleasure to introduce to you all today Gary Singh, author of The Unforgettable San Jose Earthquakes, The Momentous Stories on and Off the Field. A little bit about Gary. Gary's an award-winning journalist who also writes poetry, paints, and exhibits photographs. I know, I've seen them firsthand. Most recently, he was a Steinbeck Fellow in creative writing at his alma mater and my alma mater, San Jose State University. But most importantly, Gary, how I've come to know this talented man. For nearly 20 years, he's written a column for the local alt weekly, the Metro Silicon Valley, called Silicon Alleys, which he also compiled into an anthology. So from 2005 to 2020, if you're looking for a textbook about Silicon Valley, I recommend that book first. So before we get started, just a reminder for all of you watching on the YouTube stream, if you have any questions, please submit them in the YouTube chat, and we'll circle back and get to them in the final 15 minutes.
Don't be shy.
Yeah. With that being said, Gary, just congratulations on this new book. I know it was a labor of love. Let me start off by asking you, talk to us about this moment you're delivering it into. Why now? And yeah, tell us what it was like to put that together.
Well, I grew up watching every sport when I was a little kid in the 70s in San Jose, California. And I remember all of the Oakland Raiders teams. I remember Stabler and Fred Biletnikoff and Dave Casper and Ray Guy. And I think I was a Ray Guy fan just because I was a soccer player and he was the kicker. I think that was my attitude when I was like 7 or something. I remember, we didn't have cable television yet, so I remember learning about the Islanders and about the Habs in Montreal. I remember my parents took me to see a whole lot of Giants games and A's games in the late 70s, early 80s. So I saw McCovey play after he came back. I saw Ricky Henderson play when he was first starting and McCovey when he was finishing his career. And so a lot of us grew up watching every sport. In San Jose, the sport that we had was the San Jose Earthquakes. That was our major sport. San Francisco had the Giants and the 49ers. Oakland had the Raiders and the A's, the Warriors. And at least in San Jose, where I grew up, a lot of us, especially those of us that were children of immigrants, everybody played soccer, okay? And everybody watched a program called Soccer Made in Germany on public television. So we became versed in all of the European highlights, just like we knew what the Raiders were doing and the 49ers were doing and the Giants were doing and the Earthquakes were doing, And there would be charity matches between the Earthquakes and the Raiders. They'd play basketball and raise money, So everybody was a Bay Area team, okay? And being from San Jose, the Earthquakes were all that we had, okay? If you grew up in San Jose in the 70s, there wasn't a whole lot of stuff to do if you were a kid. Your parents either drove you to Frontier Village or they drove you to a shopping mall or they took you to Earthquakes games. And, when the Earthquakes started exactly 50 years ago, it was one of the hugest things that anybody in San Jose had ever seen. And at that time, nobody even considered San Jose to be any kind of city with any name recognition of any sort. All we had was minor league baseball. And so then the minor league baseball team would play against, Lodi, Visalia, Bakersfield. Okay. And then the Quakes came along and it was a relatively brand new sport for most Americans. Not everybody knew what soccer was. So the team unleashed this guerrilla marketing operation by showing up at shopping malls and everybody's soccer practices and even came to your homes for dinner. So a lot of people in the stands had already met one of the players, by the time everybody's going to these games. Okay. And none of this had ever happened. And all of a sudden in San Jose, people got to open the newspaper and see their team, the Earthquakes, in the same standings as like Vancouver and New York and Chicago and Tampa Bay, okay, and that had never happened in San Jose before, okay. It was generally considered like the doormat of the Bay Area, okay. You know, there had never been anything. No one knew where San Jose was.
Yeah.
When the Raiders started in 1960, nobody knew where Oakland was either. Okay, so there were just as many people that were unsure about whether they should call the team Oakland. Okay, you know, so that same issue came up with the Earthquakes when they started. You know, they wanted to be the first team in San Jose. They did not want to be another team in San Francisco or another team in Oakland. And it sounded like a ridiculous argument because nobody had heard of San Jose at that time, 50 years ago.
Yeah.
And they were proven right. You know, they found a huge audience. They caught lightning in a bottle. And all of us, my generation, we all grew up with it. And that's where it all started. And nobody had any idea that the sport would still be here 50 years later.
Yeah. So the reason why I think you all should get this book, because literally no one else has been there since the beginning, other than you, who's writing about this stuff.
Crazy George has been there.
Yeah, Crazy
since
George,
the beginning.
right? But he's not writing books. Is my point. Yeah, you know, we're in San Francisco. I'd be remiss if I didn't ask.
Yeah,
because everyone's wondering. You know, we do have a new women's soccer team in the region now. The sport is reaching, you know, new commercial heights that it hasn't before. For those who don't know the backstory, can you talk a little bit about how that ownership in San Jose came to be and why it ended up there instead of up here?
That's a great question. There is a direct connection to the 49ers and the history of the 49ers. There's two people who are the ones that I mean, there's many people who were there at the beginning who helped, okay, but there were two main people that I would say are the ones that I end up talking about. Milan Mandaric was from the original Yugoslavia at that time. He's Serbian, but he was from what was then the original Yugoslavia. And so he was an early 70s tech entrepreneur. Okay, now early 70s, you know, the term Silicon Valley is just being invented. Okay, nobody's saying that phrase yet. Okay, so he's here in Saratoga and in the South Bay, and he got together with a guy named Dick Berg, who was the promotions director for the 49ers during the era in which they were moving from Kezar into Candlestick, okay, and Dick Berg was the guy that organized all the zany halftime stuff. You know, if there was an elephant doing stuff or a camel doing stuff, they basically knew somebody at Marine World. You know, they could make a phone call and say, okay, well, I need a buffalo or something, okay, and they would come out there and do all this zany halftime promotional stuff. And you could argue either way whether this needs to be done, okay, but that's what he did. He had a knack for promoting stuff, okay? And it was them two, and he was one of the first people who understood that a lot of the 49ers fan base and even the Giants fan base was actually coming from the peninsula and the South Bay. Maybe not a majority, okay, but a lot of it was. He was one of the first people to identify that phenomenon. So he understood this. And him and Milan are the ones that essentially fought for the idea of San Jose's first, you know, major sports franchise, and that's what happened, and that's how they started.
Where was American soccer at this point? Because everyone thinks of Major League Soccer,
right?
But they forget the decades of history before then. Where was American soccer at this point?
Well, at this point, there's already a league called the North American Soccer League, but every team is drawing maybe like 5,000 people. Okay, This is before Pele had showed up, before any of this had happened. Okay, and so, you know, in the late 60s, there was a couple leagues that came together and became the North American Soccer League. And there was a team in Oakland called the Clippers, you know, who sort of like led to the Earthquakes from adjacent to the Earthquake, to what became the Earthquakes.
They're North Bay roots.
East Bay roots, actually. So at this time, soccer is still a relatively brand new, unheard of sport in the U.S. It's only sons of immigrants and immigrants that are playing it, more or less. Okay, and then when the Quakes started in '74, they were drawing the largest attendance just for that first couple of years. Okay,
Yeah.
this is before Pele came into the league. Okay, and then Pele came into the league in '75, and then everything changed. Okay, then they started drawing 20, 30,000 people, and the Quakes never ever got to that level. Okay, but right there, and then when the Cosmos, this is a famous story. It's all been documented now. But the Cosmos were like the Real Madrid of the time. Okay, they spent vastly disproportionate more money than anybody else,
To their detriment.
to the whole league's detriment. And then every other team then thought that they needed to get an equivalent of Pele, and they tried to do that with no revenue coming in at the same time. So, and then the league eventually, the league
Build it and they will come, Gary.
yeah,
This is-
yeah. And then this is a well-documented story now. And then the whole league eventually, after every team is moving around and relocating and folding and, moving from Oakland to Edmonton and Hawaii to Las Vegas and whatever else. And then so the whole league finally collapses in 85. Okay, 84 is the last season. Okay, and then nobody knew what was going to happen at that point.
Yeah.
But that's where the whole story begins with the San Jose Earthquakes.
Before the NASL implodes, talk a little bit about how old you were when your mom got these tickets, and what do you remember of that time?
This is a great question. The first season was 1974. We were not there. I mean, I was alive in 1974, but we did not go to the games until I'm pretty sure it was 77, because I distinctly remember my dad and my mom sitting there watching like local San Jose news, and Pele came to San Jose twice, 1975 and 1976. And I distinctly remember sitting in the living room with my parents and my dad my dad knew the game. My dad would play soccer barefoot, okay, even when he was an adult, okay, which was common in India. That's just what they did, okay, So I distinctly remember being there in the living room as a kid, and my dad and my mom watching the local news, and we're learning that Pele had just come here again. So then my dad's saying, like, we need to go to these games. Okay, so the next year after that was 77, and I think we went to maybe 3 or 4 games that year. So I remember Gabo being there. I remember Buzz Demling being there. So I know it was before 78. Okay?
Yeah.
And then starting in 78, then we had season tickets all the way until the end. And then, but my mom and my dad is who essentially together decided to get those tickets. And if they hadn't have done that, I probably never would have gone to the games. And even though I played soccer, but I don't think I would have been as dedicated to it as. And then when Major League Soccer started in '96, the current league, my dad was passed away by then, but my mom is who was still a fan, so she paid for the season tickets and she took me to every game. Or we went to every game. And late '90s, I became a journalist, more or less. And but it was still my mom buying the season tickets that enabled me to go to all this and stay with it. And I was working at Spartan Stadium at that time too. But my mom buying my parents buying the tickets is what made this happen.
Yeah. Does your mom still follow the team at all these days?
Not so much now, because when PayPal Park first opened, she was still going to the games by herself as like a 75-year-old. Okay. But she can't.
You graduated the press box.
Well, yeah. No, I graduated the press box when they were still at Spartan Stadium. But my mom can't. She can't walk all the way across the parking lot and up all these stairs by herself.
Yeah.
I stopped letting her. She would have, but I stopped letting her do that. It was dangerous, So, and she just couldn't do it anymore. But so she's not there every game, but I keep her posted on what's going on. She watches the highlights and stuff, and she's read the books, and I've told her 1,000 times that, this is because you guys took me to these games. And you'll see that with a lot of people who come to the reunions, and a lot of people that are at the games now who were there, who are my age, no matter how terrible the current team is, okay, will tell you a similar thing. Like, look, if we just want to pass this on to our kids, we grew up going to the games in the 70s, and I don't have kids, but people my age that are at the games, they're saying this. So, yeah, I just want to pass this on to my kids and have them grow up and go. And this is what you see in any sport, okay, There's people at Niner games that have been there for 80 years in their family. It's the same thing, okay? They just want to pass it on to their kids. That's why people are so the diehard fans that are still there, and you would see this in Latin America or in Europe, if this is your hometown club, this is the club that you're born into, and even if they're doing terrible, you still go support the club and all that.
Yeah,
that's generally the attitude. It's harder to do that with American soccer because it's a different type of league and structure, and it's still a relatively new league, even though it's almost 30 years old now. It's still relatively fledgling, as they say.
I want to put a pin or a bookmark on that kind of idea of generations and how we pass memories down and how those, in turn make the, I would say lift the sports club to something bigger than just, a shell of a logo that anyone could spin up, right?
Yeah.
This isn't the first book you've written about the earthquakes. Obviously, I'm sitting next to the history you've written about it. But walk us through the format of this new book that you've just dropped. When someone picks it up, what's it going to read like? What are they going to find out? Yeah.
That's a great question. I'm glad you asked that because this is not the way anybody would normally ever want to write a book. Okay. Like history is not, well, basically this is a 50th anniversary book. It's celebrating 50 years of the earthquakes and all their history and all the different incarnations and all the obstacles that they've overcome. So it goes 74, 75, 76, year by year, all the way up until right now.
Yeah.
Okay. And this is not the way anybody would normally want to write a book. Okay. History is not linear. Our lives don't sort themselves out into neat linear fashion like this.
Yeah.
If you're a journalist or a novelist or a historian, nobody would want to say, okay, first this happened in 74, then this happened in 75, then this happened in 76. Exactly. Okay, nobody would want to do that. But after writing the first book, which was me interviewing a lot of former coaches and general managers and players and prioritizing people that had been part of multiple eras, like Johnny Moore and Frank Yallop and Dominic Kinnear, everybody's in the book. There was no way to update. That book came out in 2015 in conjunction with when PayPal Park opened up. So there was no way to update the book just by adding the next 9 years to it. Okay. Publishers generally don't work that way. They'd have to discontinue all the first versions. If I was Taylor Swift, they might do that. And it was selling 80 million copies out the door. Then
we'll re-record everything.
Yeah. Then the publisher might let me do that. But this generally is not how things work. So about a year ago, when the team started talking and saying that they were going to be celebrating the 50th anniversary and taking it seriously, as they should, then I said, okay, great. This would be a great opportunity to do one of those like this day in Quakes history type of souvenir projects, except it's just this year in Quakes history type of souvenir projects. And like I said, even though that's not exactly how anybody would normally want to write a book, if you do, but what I knew is that when you do hold this in your hand and you look at it and you see 76, 77, all the way up until right now, and you see that it really is 50 years of struggle and stuff that is to be obstacles overcome, and you really see this as when you look at it through the grand sweep of history, it really is an amazing journey that this whole club has been on, and it would help other people understand the history. And it would help people appreciate the history a lot more. And it's not in the history. No one's saying history is more important than the disasters of the current moment. Okay. Mm-hmm. But it's more, it would help people celebrate the history. And I think if you do look at it, a lot of other clubs will see that this is a pretty cool template or a toolbox or a guide, for the other clubs that do maybe 20 years from now want to look at their own history and trying to figure out how they can fill in the gaps maps and connect things and connect the dots and things like that. Because I do think it really does provide a great way of showing, how the dots are connected, and especially in the in-between eras when there were a lot of people in the 80s and early 90s fighting to keep the sport alive in the Bay Area. And in San Jose, the league, the first game in the league in MLS was in San Jose. We had the first goal, we had the first game, and they didn't choose New York or Los Angeles, they chose San Jose, and that's a good point, and that's always what this team has been about. It's always been like an anti-New York, anti-LA kind of team. See, in the 70s, when the Cosmos were spending zillions of dollars and they were like, the Real Madrid of the day, okay, the Earthquakes at that time were like the anti-Cosmos, okay? They were like the working class team who all hung out with each other off the field, and there were no rock stars, there were no head cases. And
well, eventually a rock star would come, right? But we'll get to that. We'll get to that.
And that's always what I think the team now is sort of inheriting that now. That doesn't mean I think the team should be a third-rate pub team forever. Okay, I'm not saying that. I'm saying, but there is a working class history to it.
Yeah.
And even if you get some fantastic, naturally gifted players like Hernan Lopez, for example, there's still a working class spirit to this. That I think. That everybody gets. And again, it doesn't mean I think it should be a third grade below Z budget team. I'm not saying that, because sometimes people misinterpret this humor. Okay, but there is a cool working class history, and the song that Lars Fredriksson wrote 10 years ago, it completely
from Rancid, right?
Yeah, it completely nailed that whole aspect of the history because the whole lyrics are like, "This is not New York or Los Angeles. We don't want any movie stars on this freaking team. Okay, this is a team that's like when Paul Child was put in the San Jose Sports Hall of Fame, we were all partying at Britannia Arms afterward, and he was like, "Look, this team never went to banquets. We went to the pub afterwards. Okay, that's how they were.
Yeah.
Now they're having a banquet this Friday. Okay, they're all going to come back. Okay, but that's always been a working class street level team that connects to the community. Now nowadays you can't always do that. People are making a lot more money. You can't. I mean, like LeBron's not just going to come show up at everybody's bake sale. Okay, it's a different era. Okay.
Well, yeah, Apple's involved now.
Right, but
well, yeah, no, you're getting to.
But they sign autographs for everybody. Wando was like that. Even Landon, when he was here, he was like that. He would stand there and sign autographs until the last person was gone.
Yeah. You're getting to a lot of stuff I eventually want to get to, but I do want to put one more note on the book is that every year that you covered, you have an original photo that you were able to find.
Yeah.
Right. And this is really cool. People see that, and we were chatting before this, they assume that you work for the team, but you don't. You wrote this as a fan. How did you get those photos into the book?
Well, that's a great question. I'm glad you asked that.
Thanks. I'm filled with them.
No, I mean, sometimes people get confused. They think that the Earthquakes have hired me to write the books. But no, I don't know why people think that. Okay. I'm a journalist. So I write a book proposal and I pitch the idea to the publisher. The publisher says yes, hopefully, and then we argue over the contract and all that stuff. And then I sign the book contract, and then I write the book. And so I'm a journalist. This is how it works. Okay, the team is not paying me to write the book. The team is not employing me to write the book.
Yeah.
But with the Earthquakes. They supported the idea from the beginning. They knew that I had been around for a zillion years and I'm still here, and that there isn't any, but if I don't write a book, nobody else is ever going to. I'm the only one insane enough to even think there's a story here. Okay, first of all, okay. So
I'm grateful for that, Gary.
Yeah. So this is on, both of these books are on History Press, and so the way these books work is you as the author have to have everything teed up. You have to provide all the photos and make sure that you have permission to use all the photos and do all that. So that's the main reason why I knew that I could even do both of these books is that one, I have. There's a huge archival collection of materials at History San Jose. So that's where all the historical photos in both these books are from. And then because I've been in the press box and I've covered the team for so many years, the team knows that, I know what I'm talking about, hopefully. And then so the team actually, the club, the Earthquakes, actually let me look through their whole tranche of photos that the photos that they actually owned and are allowed to let me use. And they let me just take whatever I wanted, basically. And I can't stress how impossible that would normally be anywhere else. Okay, there's no such thing as a professional sports franchise just letting the journalist walk in the door and sit down and just look through 40,000 photos and take whatever you want for your book. Okay, there's no scenario anywhere where that happens. Okay?
If they just have these all in a binder or something, now I'm like, yeah.
I just took, well, in this book, this was the only thing that was difficult about this book, is that it went year by year, 74, 75 until right now.
Mm-hmm.
So there had to be a photo that was for each one of those years.
Yeah.
Okay, so I can't be writing about 1974 and put a photo of like Landon Donovan right there. There's got to be something from 70. It doesn't have to be, but I think that's what I wanted to do with the book, and that's what I did. So and that was the only tedious part of it, but it wasn't really even tedious. It was just fun. I mean, to me, and this is where it relates to a lot of the newspaper columns that I write anyway. I mean, to me, research is a process. Research and writing and, even traveling and is all the same journey for me as a writer. This is just what I do. This is something that I would be sitting there in a library looking at anyway, even if I'm not writing a book, Yeah. So that's why it was never even work for 1 second,
Yeah, no, and that's worth the price of the book by itself, just these photos. As someone who is from San Jose, who works up here in San Francisco, I often find myself having to kind of defend my hometown a little bit, explain to people, and this is a central theme I pick up from this book, is that this team has like a soul or tradition that is earned and built over time, right? Can you talk about what that is? And you were already starting to scratch at it when you were talking about like anti-LA, anti-New York.
Right.
And talk about it really like in comparison to the landscape we have today, in that where we have Apple, where we have a team called Inter Miami that can spawn up and, have Lionel Messi tacked onto it. Talk about the special kind of culture that the San Jose Earthquakes have built. Yeah.
Well, that's a great question. I just don't even know where I could start. Everything that we've already talked about, the history, I think, is part of the culture and the spirit of the club. And there is no other club. I mean, Vancouver, Seattle, and Portland have the same timeline that we have,
right,
but they don't have the endless parade of reunions that we keep doing all the time. Okay, and like in 2016, for example, it was the 20th anniversary of the very first MLS team, the San Jose team that we had that played the very first MLS game in San Jose.
In 96.
Yeah, 96. So that team all came back and had a 20th anniversary reunion in 2016. Okay. No other team in the league is even talking about like reunions. Okay, it's all so what the Quakes first did a reunion game in 1984. Okay, it was a 10-year anniversary from 1974, and then they did in 1989. They had a 15-year anniversary game with alumni. George Best came to both of those. I was there for both of those. Okay, So the Quakes have always done these reunions and these old timers games, even when nobody's really even that old yet. Okay. So, and then in 2016, I thought that was a landmark moment because we had the first game of the current league. And I know this gets kind of confusing with all these years and numbers and anniversaries and things. Okay. But the current league began in 1996. We had the very first game in the league in San Jose. The 20th year anniversary of that team, of that 1996 team, came back in 2016, and then it suddenly made sense that, okay, these anniversaries and reunions are no longer just these old timers from the 70s talking about stuff. The current era, people that are my age, are now having 20-year reunions and all that. So, but the Quakes have always done this kind of stuff. So there's always been this abstract, gloriously idiosyncratic, non-linear sort of piecemeal, janky, beautifully janky history of just reunions and celebrations and things always going on. And any other country, especially in Latin America or Europe, the clubs do these things. Okay, you know, this is what historical clubs do. Okay, and most of the other teams in MLS are not that old. They either don't think about history or they're the newer teams. They haven't been around long enough to care about any of this stuff.
Yeah.
So that was one of the other reasons why I wrote the book, is kind of like more to plant the seed, and then the tree will grow, and I won't be around by the time the shade happens. Okay, you know, because then people will see 20 years from now that, yeah, their team can now be celebrating and partying and having these anniversaries, and because the Quakes did all this first. Okay, you know.
And this is,
you know, does that make sense? Okay.
Yeah, and everything you talked about, like, people love that about European soccer or soccer overseas, right?
Right.
You know, I'm thinking about, like, Welcome to Wrexham right now, which people are fawning over.
That's a perfect example.
Yeah, with, you know, nearly a century's worth of history. I mean, and all that stuff is, you can't make that up, right?
Just yesterday, for example, when Italy scored that goal in the last play of the game, you know, which enabled against Croatia, which enabled them to go through to the knockout round. Everybody was immediately talking about the last time this had happened in the other tournament where they beat Croatia and did this, and people were talking about when they won the European Cup last time, and when they won the '82 World Cup, when Paolo Rossi was there and Dino Zoff was the goalkeeper, and there's the famous photo where the goalkeeper is on the airplane drinking whiskey and smoking with the president of Italy after the, you know, all this is part of the history of everything. Okay. Yeah. So, and in the United States, most teams don't think like that yet. The league is too young, but the Earthquakes are in the perfect position to show everybody else how this is done. And that was partly the reason to write the book. Now, again, nobody's claiming that it's more important than how terrible the current team is. The team is doing very badly right now, so I'm not saying this is more important. Okay, if the team consistently does horrible on the field and won't even sign, you know, decent players to compete, yeah, then you're going to lose all the fans. Okay, I'm not claiming otherwise. Okay, but why? But this came out before the season started, so let's just get that out of the way first. Okay, but so I'm more of a historian. That's what I write about, and I love to find connections and then show people the grander sweep of history, so they do have an idea that this is something worth fighting for. And, you know.
Let's talk about, before we kind of bring it to more contemporary characters that people might recognize, let's talk about what I like to call the dark ages of American soccer. So that stage between the NASL imploding to let's say 96, when Major League Soccer gets off its feet. What was that time like? I mean, who was running the team? What were they doing? Yeah, what sticks out to you about that?
That's a great question. So the NASL, that's the league that had Pele and Beckenbauer, Cruyff, and Johan Cruyff and all these famous Europeans. You know, that league spent all its money and folded in 1984. Okay, and so in the case of the Earthquakes, you know, their attitude was, well, just because the league folds doesn't mean we're going to stop playing. Okay, you know. So you know, it's not our fault the league folded. Okay, the league didn't fold because of anything the Earthquakes did. Okay, so they just decided, okay, but because the league folds, now there's no business anymore. There's no player contracts. There's no league or anything. So why not just, you know, fill out the raw. Now again, all that's left is basically whatever equipment is lying around the office. Basically, that's, you know, so. So the last owner of the club at that time, Carl Berg, he just told Peter Bridgewater, Englishman, he said, okay, you can take the club, you know, you have the name and the logo and the rights and all of that. There was no legal paperwork or anything. They just said, take it. Okay, basically.
Gotta love the 80s.
So then Bridgewater is now the one who has the club. And so then they just decide to fill out the roster and find a few other clubs that had the same attitude, and let's just keep playing. And and then so that's how the Western Soccer Alliance then started. Now this is like 5 teams or 4 teams. It's like, I think it was like the Quakes and Seattle and Victoria, British Columbia, and somebody else. I don't even remember. Okay, so that went through a few permutations for the rest of the 80s. And then in 88, it is announced that the U.S. will have the World Cup in 1994. So then everything changes. And then it's like, okay, now we have to have some kind of nationwide league of some sort. We can't just put the World Cup here and then say, oh, well, that's it. It's over. Okay, now go away. So there has to be that in exchange for FIFA said you can have the World Cup, but you got to start a league of some sort. The sport has to be happening here, okay, after this. So there was a lot of different people that came in, and Peter Bridgewater was a British guy, was in Vancouver first, and then came and took over the Earthquakes in the final year, and then he was responsible more than anybody else for keeping the sport alive in the Bay Area.
Yeah.
He was the venue director for the Stanford games of the World Cup. When the World Cup was here, he ran him and a few other people, but ran the Stanford venue. And then there was another guy, Dan Van Voorhees, who started his own team, the San Francisco Bay Blackhawks, and they became like the mini New York Cosmos of the day. They spent a lot of money and had a lot
San Francisco would go on to do that a couple of times,
yeah,
by the way.
They had a lot of great players. And then that team is what was then sold to when MLS started. Part of the reason they were allowed to start a team in San Jose was that Dan sold that club, the Blackhawks, to MLS, the player contracts and everything else. And then the players were then distributed throughout the rest of the league when it started. But that team was the bare bones of the first San Jose team when MLS started. And so there's absolutely a through line that goes all the way through. There are these trolls out there who say that, well, the Quakes now has nothing to do with the NASL Quakes, which is a very misguided of attitude.
They got to read your book and find out.
Yeah, I mean, people are just trolls. That's what they are. Okay, it's troll culture, and I look at it from more of a Buddhist perspective, in that everything arises due to the coming together of all phenomena arise due to the coming together of previous phenomena. Yeah. If you look at the history, there was everything absolutely led to everything else. Okay, when the Quakes are saying 50th anniversary, this and that, nobody's claiming that it's 50 continuous years of the same franchise in a business sense. Nobody's saying that. No one's claiming that. Okay, it's more like this is 50 years of the sport in San Jose. And if you look at the history in both these books, it demonstrates that everything led to everything else.
Exactly.
Okay, when the MLS started in '96, everybody who had grown up in San Jose at that time understood it to be a logical continuation of everything that had crystallized in the '70s. Okay, it wasn't the same business as the previous team, but people fought to keep the name, and it happened more than once later on when the whole Houston debacle happened, and then they brought the team back.
We'll get to that. We'll get to that.
Everyone's favorite person, John Fisher, brought the team back with Lou Wolf and
hero John Fisher.
Yeah, and even at that time, not everybody. It wasn't a slam dunk that they were even going to call it the Earthquakes, but the fans are who fought for this, and this is what is important. This is what needs to be remembered in perpetuity, that the fans are who fought over and over again to keep the Earthquakes' name and the statistics and the history in San Jose. The league executives would never have just automatically done this. Okay, right. The fans are who fought to make all of this happen and stay in San Jose. And the fans should be celebrated.
100%. And that's another beautiful thing about the club.
It wasn't Fisher. It wasn't anybody there. The fans are who did this.
Really quickly, what's one thing that you?
If that answered your question.
Yes, it does. Really quickly, because we totally skipped over it. One of England's most decorated players actually arrives to San Jose. He comes to play for the Earthquakes. George Best. What will stick out to you about that run? In his time in San Jose.
Well, if you don't know who George Best was, okay, before everybody, I mean, if you just want to talk about all the great soccer players of the 70s, 80s, 90s until now, before everybody, there was George Best. Okay, in the 60s, in England. It was, especially in England in the 60s, soccer was entirely a working class sport. Okay. nothing, hardly any of it is on TV. Okay, there is no such thing as like a rock star player. Okay, it's entirely a working class game. They're playing like in the mud half the time. This is the '60s, so there's not even yellow cards and red cards yet. So it was a completely, and then George Best comes along, and right in parallel with the Beatles exploding in England, okay, and then George Best has hair like them, and he's only like 17, 18 years old, and he becomes like the first ever like rock star football player. This is in the 60s, okay, not, 30 years before Beckham, okay, So Best is who essentially in England, he's from Northern Ireland. He's not English, okay, but he's playing for Man United. And he becomes the first ever like pop star footballer. And it's literally right as the Beatles are exploding. He's becoming famous and he becomes like a pinup model. All the women are in love with him. All the guys wish they were him, okay, because he gets all the chicks and all this stuff, And he also, unfortunately, happens to be an alcoholic at the same time. So all of which kind of collapse. He becomes famous. He becomes the most famous and best player. Pele at the time is saying George Best is the best player in the world. Okay, and then he quits everything about age 27 or so, which is probably like 70 or 71, somewhere in there. And then he just kind of takes a nosedive, doesn't come back to England, and he winds up coming over to the United States. The rumor was that the Cosmos only got Pele because they couldn't get George Best first. Okay, I don't know if that's true or not. So then eventually he goes to play for Los Angeles, becomes and then goes to play for Fort Lauderdale. And then at this point he's like 35 years old and he's
still drinking.
Yeah, and the drink is, the press are following him all over the world. Again, this is the equivalent of like John Lennon coming to like play in like a dive bar in San Francisco somewhere. Okay,
or maybe Messi today, right?
Yeah, So and then he comes to the Earthquakes so he plays for the Earthquakes in 80 and 81, and he's still in and out of the bars. He's not showing up to practices and stuff like that, and he's still very much public with his drinking and stuff. But he still has flashes of incomparable genius on the field, and nobody had ever, even when he's old and washed up, old meaning like 35, okay, and he scores some of the greatest goals anybody had ever seen, even at that age, and even in San Jose, and in San Jose is where his son is born. And San Jose is where him and Angie, his wife, had lived, or in Los Gatos. So, and there are many people who still, and he lasted 2 years, and then he never played. I think he went back to England and played one season at Bournemouth or something like that. But that was the end of his career. Okay, San Jose is where he hit rock bottom, and then that. And so I used to joke about this, but a lot of people in San Jose were there, and they still who are still around. Yeah. And if you hang out in Los Gatos or in the soccer communities, everybody's got George Best stories. Everybody remembers him. Everybody. A lot of the stories are exaggerated, but a lot of people have fond memories of when he was there. Callum, his son, was born there, and he's now doing a lot of great work as far as helping out children of alcoholics and doing a lot of great charity work. And in England, he doesn't live in the U.S. But George Best, it's hard to comprehend what it was like in San Jose at that time.
I know.
Okay, 1980. Again, San Jose is essentially the backwater of the Bay Area. There is nothing to brag about. Okay, there's no reason anybody would go there for anything. Okay, and then one of the most famous sports figures in the world, in a sport that most people don't even know that he's the most famous sports figure. And when it comes to San Jose, and nobody that famous had ever come to San Jose to do anything. So he was all over the media, and it was a really big deal, and because he was unfortunately an alcoholic, it had led to his downfall, but we got to see him for 2 years, and he was a great guy with the kids, And there's if you read enough of the books and listen to the people that were there, you can see everything. You can see that there was a really amazing dude underneath the sickness, and that's and my dad was an alcoholic. I know exactly what it's like to grow up with an alcoholic. So it was just amazing to look back on, that we got to see him for 2 years.
Yeah, and they said stars don't come into San Jose.
Yeah.
I want to bring us up. I want to accelerate the timeline a little bit to around 2000, 2001. People are watching the Copa America at home. They're probably talking about this generation's golden boy, Christian Pulisic.
Yeah.
But before then, before he was known for bad hair transplants,
right.
We had Landon Donovan, another star that just happened to land in San Jose. Talk about kind of the team's period of success with him during that time, and what was that like up until their relocation to Houston?
Well, it's a great question. 2001 is pretty much right when I started operating as a real journalist. Okay. Real meaning I was getting paid like $30 to write match reports. Okay. So I was in the press box. Okay. I was in the press box legitimately as somebody who was covering, the sport. And I'm sitting there in the press box right above the section in Spartan Stadium where I grew up watching the games in the 70s and 80s. And, I was a teenager selling malts and peanuts in the crowd, at the Blackhawks game, or maybe before that, at the international games that Peter Bridgewater booked all the time. So to be now, after having finished with college, or essentially, drinking myself into a situation where I didn't make any money, here I was in Spartan Stadium, covering the earthquakes, and my mom and her friends were still in the crowd with their season tickets, and I'm here, and this guy named Landon Donovan is the star of America at this time.
Did you know he was a star coming in?
I don't think I didn't know.
Yeah.
I did not know the star that he was when he showed up. Everybody, as soon as we signed him, everybody was talking about it. So eventually, within seconds, everybody learned who he was. But if you talk to Frank Yaup, even he didn't know exactly the degree of what he was getting. Okay, when he came here, and then Landon was by far the best American player that we've ever had. Okay, easily. To this day, the Quakes have had, and without him, we do not win 2 championships. We do not win the Supporters Shield, or we don't win 2 championships. And then
2001, 2003.
Yeah, and the 2002 team was actually better than the team that won the year before. But those 4 years that he was here, that was like some amazing. And again, this is not most people in San Jose don't even know this is happening. Okay, they don't. The games are not selling out every game. So it's still a struggle we have some of the best player we've had, like the best player that America has ever produced playing here in our backyard. And then somehow the everyday person of San Jose still doesn't get it,
Yeah.
But those were amazing, and I look back at it with just nothing but gratitude. Okay, in 1981, as a kid, I get to see George Best score one of the greatest goals I've ever seen, and that was 1 year before Landon Donovan was born. And then 20 years later, I get to sit there in the press box watching Landon Donovan, the greatest American player at that moment, lead us to 2 championships. And then he defects to Los Angeles and comes back, and then. So it was
breaks hearts.
Yeah. So he was amazing to watch. He was the best. At that time we were still, the scenario was still, they let everybody in the locker room afterwards, and then the reporters are there with the voice recorders asking whoever wants to talk. Okay, and then Landon's only 19, 20 years old, so he talks like a teenager. Okay, he doesn't have a vocabulary that much, but then
now everyone's media trained.
Well, yeah, to see him grow into he's been married and divorced, and married again, and now right now as we're sitting here, he's in Europe doing the commentary for the Euros again, and And it's like, wait a minute, I remember when this guy was like 19 years old, living with Joe Cannon, like off Branham somewhere. Okay, like, wait a minute, but the average San Jose person doesn't know any of this stuff, And that's just the way, again, so this is all in both of the books. It's like, well, this is still a city that is not on like the major league radar of cities, okay, so, and a lot of people who live in San Jose are there because they want to live in the suburbs. So how do you get them to care about any of this stuff, So it's hard,
Yeah. I want to get this last one in before we get to Q&A. I'd be remiss if we don't talk about this next guy. So after Landon Donovan, that era, when the Quakes are owned by the combination of the Crafts family and AEG, when that goes up in flames, the team gets relocated to Houston. They come back in 2008 under John Fisher and Lou Wolf, a local real estate guy, and they trade for this essentially 25-year-old bench warmer named Chris Wondolowski.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about what his rise meant and who he ended up becoming.
Well, let me back up a tiny bit and talk about when the team came back. Okay, so the team moves to Houston, and then for those of you that don't know, they did like a Cleveland Browns scenario. They kept all the records in San Jose, and because they wanted to bring and to relaunch the team again with this and keep the records and statistics here. So when they brought the team back, it would be a statistical continuation. They would still be able to claim all the records and the history and all that. So when they moved the team, when they announced that the team was being relocated, within seconds, Lou Wolf came into the picture as the person who was going to take out the option to bring the team back and start all over again and build a stadium and all that. Okay, now Lou Wolf and Fisher had just bought the A's. This is like 2006. Okay.
Yeah.
So they had just, okay.
Going a little shopping spree here. Yeah.
So in San Jose, Lou Wolf had been around for decades. Okay. He had built a lot of stuff as a real estate developer and a hotel magnate since like the 60s, 70s, and 80s. So everybody in San Jose knew Lou Wolf. Okay, the entire old boy network of San Jose, like politicians, real estate developers, hotels, hospitality industry, convention business. Okay, everybody knows Lou Wolf. Okay, so he became the public face and the public figure to be the one who brings the team back and gets the stadium built. Okay, so even though Fisher was the one supplying the money, okay, but most of it. But if it had been just John Fisher, he would have been laughed out of the room. Okay, people would have said, well, I don't, but Lou Wolf was the one that made. Yep. That he was the public figure that everybody in San Jose knew. He's the one MLS went to.
Right.
He's the one that took the call, from AG and the league executives and said, yeah. So he was the public face. So he's the one that I'm pretty sure made this happen. Okay. Fisher just stood in the background with his money and didn't talk to anybody. Okay.
Sounds about right.
Right. Okay. So anyway, and then they signed Chris Wondolowski, who nobody at this point really knew who he was. And then he turned into this massive scoring machine and became the league leader for a couple of years and became the public's poster boy of the entire franchise. And he's from Danville, went to Chico State, and became Bay Area guy. And he became the face of the whole team, the main player.
Played in the 2014 World Cup.
Yeah, yep. Played in the and then I forgot what you asked, but he became the poster boy of the whole team, and then he was the first poster boy that we had since the Landon Donovan era. And then Wando became the captain. He became the league's leading scorer of all time and owns every scoring record in the history of the Quakes. And then he scored almost a majority of everything that we ever did.
Yeah. And he came in kind of like just at the perfect, and they totally stumbled upon him, right? Because at this point, spurned by Landon Donovan, new expansion team playing at a creaky Buckshot Stadium in Santa Clara University, and here comes this totally unknown guy who's making less than a fast food worker, but still sticks it out for 6 years, and his career takes off, and he's a late bloomer. But yeah, I want if people are interested in learning more about Wando's journey, Simon Campbell from the San Francisco Business Times and I actually did a podcast. We put together a podcast about his remarkable career called Hello Football. So check that out. I want to get to some questions from the audience, Gary. This dovetails nicely with Lou Wolf. Somebody asked, has the resurrection of PayPal Park as a dedicated soccer venue for the Earthquakes and now Bay FC, has that helped to amplify the team's fame, do you think?
I think it helped when it got built. It helped solidify the fact that this had been basically a homeless team for 40 years. And I don't feel like that's even hyperbole. It really was a homeless team. When we played at Spartan Stadium in the 70s and 80s, and even in the 90s and the championship era, it was never our stadium. It was always San Jose State football program stadium. Okay, and even in the 70s, it was their stadium. We were just playing there, and it was never ours. And at Buckshaw, they brought the team back, and then we were only supposed to play at Buckshaw Stadium in Santa Clara for a couple of years. That turned into 7? And then because it took so long to get PayPal Park built. So that's why it was such a big deal when PayPal Park did get built. That's why I wrote the first book. That's when the first book came out, was in conjunction of when the stadium opening. And I think it did. I think it did a great deal. I think they could have designed it a lot better. I don't think it's there's still a lot of, it's a really small place, and a lot
longest bar in North America, baby.
And a lot of people think that because it's small, that conveys the fact that the team is embarrassed about themselves, and they admit that they're a small team, a small brand, and all that. Well, that's a fair argument. Okay, it is. And from my perspective, a lot of us were just glad that it proved that this is, we think permanent. Okay, this has been a homeless team for 40 years, and now we have a place to play. And and I think when it got built, a lot of people were just glad that something got built. And now you look back on it, and okay, sure, it could be bigger, but what do you do?
Yeah.
I mean, you can walk around the whole thing in 8 minutes. Okay. When it's filled up, when there's 18,000 people and everybody's loud and singing and chanting, it really is a great environment. Yep. But the problem is the Quakes have been unable to fill it up because of all these other problems.
Yeah.
The owner acts like a slumlord, basically, and and a lot of the and so they've had up and down coaches and GMs, and the owner is not. I'm not hiding. I'm running away from talking about Fisher, in case anybody's wondering. Okay, nobody likes him. I don't know any Quakes fan who really wishes he was the owner or is happy that he's the owner.
Yeah. And he is at games sometimes. He is at games.
Yeah, he's at most of the games. He doesn't always sit in the same place, but he's at most of the games. Yeah. And I don't know him. I've been in the elevator with him. But like everybody else, I wish he would sell the team to somebody who has more of a soccer mentality and really wants to spend years. But again, it's easy to blame everything on. I'm not giving him cover. I'm not defending him. Okay, but there are problems within the whole organization as a whole. He has spent more money than he did 10 years ago. Okay, so it's just there are other teams that are spending less than us that have better coaches and better squads and better vision, and so it's easy to blame everything on one person.
Right.
I'm not defending him. Okay, I wish he was. I wish somebody else was the owner too. But it's dark right now. It's really hard to get anybody to be happy about anything that's going on with the Quakes right now.
Well, I will say
it's not helping me sell books. Okay,
I will say
I hope he does sell it. I'm not convinced he's just sitting there refusing to sell the team. I think.
Yeah.
I mean,
it takes two to tango.
I mean, it's tango. I'm not. Again, I'm not. I mean, I don't. don't cover the team as a beat reporter, so I don't know what's going on, and I don't know Fisher at all, but I do know pretty much all the other executives, that are there, and I don't. And this is the problem with being friends with everybody. I don't investigate the team. I don't. I'm not a beat reporter, so I don't really know the gossip and the palace intrigue that's going on a daily basis. I just kind of like to be the grand sweep of history dude. That's just what I evolved into. And if that people think that's a cop out, but that's just the way it is.
I don't think it's a cop out, Gary. You wrote 2 books, so I'll get you pass on that. I will say the atmosphere, to your point, when it is filled up, it wasn't that long ago. The Bay FC home opener, they sold every seat, and we're saying too, it was magical.
I was there. Yeah, that was a great. They're doing great right now. They have their own problems. Okay,
right.
It's not.
For a separate convo.
Yeah.
I want to get to another question here. Somebody asked, what year stands out the most to you in Quakes history? We got 2 more questions, so try to.
That's a great question. Oh, gee. I would say it has to be the 2003 championship season, because that was the year of the great comeback game against Los Angeles Galaxy. We were down 4 goals to nothing on aggregate, and then we came back and won that game, and it was the best comeback in the league's history at that time, the best game in the league's history.
And it was at their newly built.
No, this is at Spartan Stadium. This was the great comeback game in November of 2003. This is in the playoffs. At Bruce Arena, who at that time was coaching the national team, he was in the locker afterwards and said that was the best game that this league's ever seen. Again, this is only 7 years into the league, okay, but that was, if you had to single out 1 year, I would say 2003. That was a great season. Landon is 1 year off the 2002 World Cup. That was the best USA team that we've had, in the 2002 World Cup. They almost beat Germany Landon was was the greatest American player in the world at that point.
And he got right back to work with the Quakes right after that tournament, right?
And then 2003, I would say, because we won the championship that year, and the championship was in the brand new stadium in Los Angeles. That's what I was talking about. That was being touted as the future, touted ad nauseum as the future of the model soccer-specific stadium for the future of America, and it had just opened, and then
San Jose wins,
and then we went there and we won the title in their stadium, and they've never forgotten that.
Yeah.
Okay. LA, the Galaxy can win 5,000 titles, but we won it first in their stadium. Okay. So it's that, I would say 2003.
Yeah.
Great question. Whoever asked that.
Somebody asked on that topic, and I think I know 2 of them at least. Who are your top 3 favorite Earthquakes players of all time?
Oh, that's a great. These questions are always hard.
Thank you, audience.
Top 3. There's so many. It all depends on
your favorite
system of measurement. I would just have to say, that's really hard.
Let's rephrase it. You got to take 3 Earthquakes players out to dinner. Who are you taking?
I would take Paul Child and Chris Wondolowski, and probably Landon too.
Yeah, there you go.
And everybody, Landon the fans have every reason to pillory the guy with ridicule forever. Yeah, but he's a good guy. He's a good person.
Yeah. And this last question dovetails with something I want to ask too. So, in case people missed it, yesterday the Earthquakes fired their head coach Luchi Gonzalez after a month and a half charge. Coincidentally, Bay FC's general manager also abruptly resigns, but that's for another time. Somebody asked, how much has changed in 2024 with the team since your book was published? And I will add to that, maybe, how do you see the future of this team?
Oh, that's a great question. What do we got? 2 minutes left here? Okay. So this book came out, so I turned in the manuscript in September of last year. Okay, so before the last year's season was even finished yet. Okay, so Luchi is in the book twice. Okay, and photographs and everything. Okay, and then this came out in February of this year, before the current season even started. Okay, so that's not a That's not an excuse, okay? But, that's what happened, okay? And I don't think anybody thought it was going to be this bad this year. But what it does bring to, what was the question again? I'm sorry, but how has it changed since last year?
Since the book came out, then how do you view the future of this team after the news we just talked about?
I think Hernan Lopez, the guy we just signed, I think is the most gifted natural player that we've signed since I can remember. But the first thing it revealed was how difficult it will be with many of the other players that are there, because some of the players they're using are just out of college. They're not naturally gifted, grow up in the streets from age 3 players, and so it's going to be really hard. And there's deep, dark problems behind the scenes here. They're trying to compete with a team that is nowhere near the level of half the teams in the league, So
there are 29 other teams in MLS now. When they were winning, there were like 10.
Yeah. So, and we have, except for a couple people, we have relatively the same roster. But then, so if for the people that say it's all the coach's fault, I don't think it's all the coach's fault. It's shared. The responsibility is shared. But you have to, especially after that last game last Saturday in LA, when even the players on the field are just about talking trash on each other, and then the stuff Benji says afterward. Everything had collapsed. Okay? After that game, you have to. If you're not going to let the coach go, because something's.
Yeah.
It's obvious that he hasn't lost the entire locker room, but there's deep problems. Only a completely incompetent GM would just let that go. You have to make a decision. Someone's got to be held accountable. I'm not claiming it's all the coach's fault. It's not. Yeah. This has been a pattern. You have an owner that acts like somewhat of a slumlord. Okay, he doesn't. But then it's not all his fault either.
We're coming up on time, so the takeaway is present's bleak, but the history is beautiful.
I think the future looks good too. I think Ian will be a good coach. Ian's been around for a long time. He knows the problems, and he knows. I think Ian Russell has a better grip on how to get over the obstacles that are ahead. How's that for an answer?
There you go.
Okay.
So thank you, Gary. And remember, guys, Gary's the author of The Unforgettable San Jose Earthquakes, the momentous stories on and off the field. We encourage you to pick up a copy of Gary's new book at your local bookstore. If you would like to support the club's efforts in making virtual and in-person programming like this possible, please visit the website at commonwealth.org. Again, I'm Kevin Wynn from the San Francisco Standard. Thank you for spending your Tuesday evening with us, and take care.